film underrated, I imagine immediate eye rolls and disinterest, but please bear with me. For if any piece of media were more deserving of this title, I would genuinely be shocked. Oliver & Company has been the Disney film hidden in shadow behind the company savior The Little Mermaid, and that's something I think needs to change. For me, this movie belongs in the Disney Renaissance, and I'm going to tell you why. Disney eras are an interesting phenomenon. You have the Golden Age, the War Era, Silver Age, Bronze Age, the Renaissance, Post-Renaissance, and the Revival Era. There are lots of different variations on those names, but that's the general idea. Because the company had lasted so long, it makes sense to group films into categories based on different time periods. However, these eras also come with certain connotations. For example, the Golden Age, Renaissance, and Revival, they're viewed as the peak of Disney's collection. Faultless films that are timeless classics. Meanwhile, the Bronze Age and Post-Renaissance are shrouded in darkness as times that Disney should like to forget. To me though, whilst these eras hold some truth to them, I often feel like that's a major generalization and dismissal of many great Disney films that fall into these lesser eras. I mean, sure, Bambi didn't perform well in the 40s due to wartime sensibilities, but I don't think you'd find a single person who'd argue that Bambi isn't a Disney classic. I can already hear somebody trying to correct me, no, the wartime era was actually from 1943, but I feel like that's a retrospective adjustment considering Bambi copped criticism exactly for its lack of appeal during the war. If that isn't the start of the wartime era, I don't know what is. My point is that there are films from every era that don't really make sense with a generalization of whether they're good or not, and there's a significant reason as to why I think Oliver & Company is so overlooked. Sitting right at the end of the Bronze Age, 1 year before The Little Mermaid, it gets shuffled off to the side with the likes of The Black Cauldron, and I just can't stand it. Of course, there are other standouts from this era like The Fox and the Hound, but in truth, I believe that Oliver & Company had significantly more overlap with the Renaissance tonally than films from the 70s and 80s. Now you might be thinking, smarty pants, it's clear that the eras mean very little in terms of individual quality, so why do you care whether Oliver & Company should be part of the Renaissance or not? Wouldn't it make more sense to argue the semantics of quality is largely unfounded? Now that's a fair argument, but like I said, there is some truth to the era quality. It's not to the severity that it's made out to be, but you can see the peaks and troughs through different time periods that are difficult to ignore. It's not that films outside the Golden Age, Renaissance, and Revival are all bad, and it's not that those other eras don't have standout films that deserve higher recognition alongside the eras that are adored. Nevertheless, tonally, overall, those particular eras aren't as magical, captivating, or generationally changing as the big three. However, the reason that I think Oliver & Company is deserving of a place at the Renaissance table is because it is exactly that. It's magical, captivating, and generationally changing. Let me explain. Growing up, I knew nothing about this movie. I hadn't heard of it, never watched it. To be perfectly honest, I only had a limited selection of Disney films growing up. I had some classics like The Lion King, Hercules, Tarzan, movies like that, but nothing too substantial. I went and saw new Disney releases, of course, but I wouldn't say I was a die-hard fan. Then I became a teenager and I thought all animated films were cringe and lowbrow. I grew again and met my girlfriend who was having none of that and introduced me to a plethora of animated movies that I'd been so wrong about. Oliver & Company's a particular favourite of hers, and so we sat down to watch that one too. To say my mind was blown would be an understatement. Of course, there were animated films I'd vaguely heard about, and whilst I had previously assumed they were average, realising they're actually really good, that was a sort of happy surprise. However, when you watch a Disney film that you've literally never heard of before and it makes a grown man cry numerous times, my world was rocked. Of course, at the time I wasn't making YouTube videos, so I couldn't immediately air all my thoughts and opinions. I went on with my life, and I let those feelings simmer. Since I've made a career out of talking about movies and TV shows, I've obviously delved deeper and deeper into the history of cinema. When I learned about the different Disney eras and what made the cut and what didn't, I definitely had some differing views. I was surprised that Cinderella's not part of the Golden Age. I was shocked at Bambi's poor reception, confused that the Aristocats and the Fox and the Hound were present in a seemingly bad era. I still have many different qualms about the various reputations particular Disney generations have, but few more so than the blatant ignorance when it comes to Oliver & Company. We can argue all day about how Lilo and Stitch or The Emperor's New Groove or Brother Bear are all stellar films and shouldn't be brushed with lesser acclaim, but at least you know that those films exist. How did I not know about Oliver & Company? It's not like kids are only exposed to Disney films from their generation. Whilst that might have been the case for me as a child, at least I knew and had seen older Disney movies. Sure, the Disney Vault existed, but from memory, it wasn't exactly difficult to get your hands on these older Disney classics either. Even now, Oliver & Company is largely forgotten. Today, though, that's all going to change. I suppose for me to convince you not only why this forgotten movie is good, but also why it's deserving of a place in the Renaissance era, I need to talk about what makes it so. We'll start with the story. Oliver & Company is based on the Charles Dickens novel, Oliver Twist. However, this time it's set in New York City instead of London, and like with many Disney adaptations, the more serious story beats are toned down. The movie starts following Oliver alongside a group of kittens waiting to be adopted. It starts off wholesome and sweet, but as time goes on, more kittens are adopted and Oliver's left on his own. Rain tears apart his cardboard box and he's almost washed down the drain, but he luckily escapes, only to be chased by 3 aggressive dogs. He climbs a fence and gets away before resting on top of a truck's tire. The next day, day, he tries again to be adopted, with people passing him by. Hungry, he tried to get some sausages before being shooed away by the vendor. This is where he meets Dodger, who proposes that they team up to steal the sausages. Oliver agrees, only for him to be immediately betrayed by Dodger and be unceremoniously flexed on in a ridiculously catchy musical number. This kid won't go down fighting though, and he follows Dodger all the way to his small boathouse. Whilst Dodger's embellishing his story to impress his friends, Oliver crashes through the roof and Dodger's humbled. The dog's owner, Fagin, shows up only to be shortly followed by his debt collector, Sykes. Unfortunately for Fagin, the dogs are not master pickpockets, since they're dogs, and so all he has is broken watches and tattered wallets to offer Sykes as payment. Obviously, the rich tycoon's not going to take this lying down, and he tells him he has 3 days to repay him, otherwise he's very obviously getting whacked. I do wonder how much he owes him. Doesn't look like this guy's in serious debt himself, but villain's got a villain. Dejected, Fagin returns only to be cheered up by the dogs and the new addition Oliver, who scratched one of Sykes' dogs. We have a cute scene where he reads to the dogs and they settle down for the night, only for Oliver to run to Dodger and snuggle up with him. I cannot get through this scene without tearing up. My god, it's some of the most wholesome shit I've ever seen in my life. The following day, the dogs and Fagin head into the city in the hopes of finding some sort of gold mine to get themselves out of trouble. They decide to attempt a robbery on a limousine, only for things to go wrong, and Oliver's discovered by a little girl named Jenny. The dogs track them down, only to realize he's been taken to a wealthy home that will require more help to break him out. Meanwhile, Jenny adopts Oliver and bonds with him in yet another heartwarming scene that makes me cry every single time. It's such a happy scene, and here I am, bawling my eyes out. The next day, the dogs arrive and break into the house to rescue Oliver. Initially, some of the dogs are hesitant because it looks like such a nice life, but with convincing from the family's jealous poodle, they abduct a sleeping Oliver and take him back home. Once Oliver's free, he asks why he was taken away, and Dodger becomes offended, thinking that Oliver simply got a taste for the final life, and he doesn't want to slum it with them anymore. It's such a heartbreaking scene because you can really see how torn the characters are and how the whole situation is. Dodger tells him to leave, only for Fagin to return and realize that Oliver's been adopted by a very wealthy family. He quickly realizes this could be a solution, and decides to ransom Oliver for enough money to get him out of debt with Sykes. Jennifer finds the ransom note and goes out with her poodle Georgette to get Oliver back. That night, Fagin proposes the plan to Sykes, but he can't go through with it when he sees the owner of Oliver's just a little girl. He gives her Oliver back, only for Sykes to abduct Jenny and ransom her instead because that would cancel out Fagin's debt. They go to rescue Jenny, which I've got to be honest is pretty dark among Disney deaths. I mean, one of Sykes' dogs gets thrown onto the train tracks and is electrocuted. Then all of the characters are heading for a train collision, only to get out of the way, except for Sykes, who is rammed by the oncoming train and obviously killed. You, of course, then have the fake out of Oliver being dead, but he isn't, and it's happy days. We end with Jenny's birthday party with Fagin, his dogs, Oliver, Georgette, and Winston the butler. Oliver and the gang will continue to be friends, but his home is with Jenny now. Fagin's out of debt, but who's to say how long that's going to last, and the movie ends on a fun, upbeat song. The end. I touched on it a couple of times in the plot summary, but it cannot be understated how heartwarming this film is. You have this rejected kitten who was supposedly so unadoptable that people giving the kittens away had reduced the price to free and left him out there in the cold rain, literally nearly washed away down the drain, only to join a ragtag group of misfits who don't have much but each other, and then he's happy. For the first time ever, he's wanted. Then you have this little girl who's as lonely as he was, with her parents too busy on an international business trip to come back for her birthday. They bond and form a beautiful friendship, only for him to be ripped away from her, and he realizes that she needs him and he needs her. She doesn't have anybody else, unlike Dodger and the gang who all have each other. As much as he loves them all, he also loves her and doesn't want to be apart from her. If that's not enough, you have this homeless man, desperate to get out of debt, and despite him seemingly doing everything legally, it's not enough. So he lowers himself to ransoming Oliver, assuming that his owner is another grown and lonely man, except far richer. Once he realizes Oliver actually belongs to a little girl, he regrets it, and despite feeling helpless, he realizes it's still wrong to do something like this, and he reforms himself. This is all the while knowing that his decision will lead to him getting killed. When Sykes instead abducts Jenny, they risk everything to save her. Also, Sykes and his Doberman, genuinely scary. The initial threatening of Fagin on the boardwalk, where he could fall to his death, whilst pouring hot ashes on his feet, breathing smoke into his face, and choking him out on the car window is his literal introduction. Then you have the dogs that are huge compared to Oliver, as well as the majority of Fagin's dogs. They attack Dodger and Fagin when he can't seem to tell Sykes his plan about ransoming Oliver. He was genuinely going to let the dogs maul and presumably kill Fagin and Dodger right in front of him. You then have the chase down in the subway where Sykes will just not give up. I mean, I realize he wants his debt paid by Fagin and Jenny could probably bring in a lot of money, but is it really worth driving your car into the underground and ruining your tires just for this kid? Sykes manages to get a hold of Jenny, so Oliver goes to rescue her and gets Sykes to let go, only for him to then be cornered by his two dogs. So Dodger goes to save Oliver, which in turn leads to another brutal fight. You see one die and be electrocuted, and then when Dodger's overpowered by the second dog, Oliver frees him, and the Doberman falls off the car as well. The tension in the scene is through the roof, especially when Sykes gets out of the driver's seat to grab Jenny, who at this point is hanging onto the the bonnet of the car, reaching for Fagin to help her. Dodger and Oliver then jump Sykes, Jenny's able to get to Fagin, and while Sykes' back is turned, Tito gets Fagin and the others off the train track. At the same time, Sykes finally rips Dodger and Oliver off him, only to be turned around and destroyed by an oncoming train. I mean, I know that Disney villains sometimes have gruesome deaths, but this one feels scarier than most. Good God. There's so many moments, I think, where the film just makes you feel more than you would expect from a largely unknown Disney movie. Obviously, the scripting's great, but I think the scoring plays a big part in it too. The score is so emotional, from the beginning where Oliver's rejected from adoption, to Oliver running to Dodger, the good company scene, the chase scene with the Oliver death fake out. It just elevates the film so much and really helps with all those emotions of finding family. The Renaissance is kind of renowned for its soundtrack, and in actuality, that was the big reason The Little Mermaid was such a success, because Disney went back to musicals. For a long time, Disney had kind of abandoned that part of its storytelling, and everybody says they brought it back with The Little Mermaid. Now, I'm not trying to compare the soundtracks between The Little Mermaid and Oliver and Company, but I am saying that Oliver brought it back first. The songs here are genuinely great. Once Upon a Time in New York City, Why Should I Worry, Streets of Gold, and of course, Good Company. Again, I'm not comparing them to the Little Mermaid soundtrack, but I do think the songs stand on their own and are just as catchy as many Renaissance songs. So if the story's good, and the soundtrack's good, is it the performances that are bad? No! They're all great and very believable, which begs the question, why is this film forgotten? Why was it not included in the Renaissance? The answer to the first is because of the second. Films right before the next great era or film are often forgotten. I couldn't tell you the Disney film before Cinderella, and yes, we know The Princess and the Frog exists, but let's be honest, it is not as renowned as Tangled. Same as Bolt, which came before both of those movies. The film just before a massive hit in a series of subpar releases are often forgotten more than most. It doesn't matter whether they're good or bad, they're just not remembered comparatively. I'd predict that Moana 2 is probably the beginning of the next big Disney age, and I think as time moves along, Wish will be very long forgotten. To be honest, it already is considerably. That's what happened to Oliver and Company. Despite it being a great film, it got massively overshadowed by The Little Mermaid, and most forgot it existed at all. Now to the second half of the question. If Oliver and Company is so good, why wasn't it considered part of the Renaissance? Well, apparently, despite significant box office success for its time, grossing $121 million off a $31 million budget, being the first animated film to gross over $100 million worldwide in its initial release, and prompting a Disney executive to announce plans they were going to start releasing Disney animated films annually, it got mixed reviews. Critics were calling it predictable or average, debate around the animation as to whether it was great or uninspired and insipid. I have to be honest, personally I thought the animation was great for its time. I mean, the amount of detail they had to put in for it to look like a living and breathing city compared to a lot of other sets for different movies which were more set in nature and need a lot less filler in the background is incredible. It seems like a lot of them equated it to Saturday morning cartoons and felt it falls short of Disney's yesteryear. Here's the key, I think, into understanding why Oliver and Company didn't make the cut for the Renaissance. It felt too familiar. Disney's renowned for its fantasy and magical European settings. Having a film set in modern New York City with singing cats and dogs? Too lowbrow for a true Disney classic. Never mind it having everything that makes sense to fit into a top-tier Disney era. Is the movie magical? Yes. You have the clear quest for found family and defeating the villain. Is that captivating? Yes. Colourful characters and a banger soundtrack with awesome action sequences. Can't get much more captivating than that. Generation defining? Also yes. It started that musical renaissance for Disney, even if everybody else has forgotten. I struggle to fathom how such a groundbreaking movie that explores following your dreams, having hope where it seems the world's against you, the morality of doing what's right even when it costs you dearly, and fighting for who you love isn't exactly the epitome of every film in the Disney Renaissance. Oliver and Company deserves a seat at the table, and I can't be convinced otherwise. With all that being said though, these have just been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think of Oliver and Company? Do you think it's underrated and deserves to be part of the Disney Renaissance, or do you think it's forgotten for a reason? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.